Hello, everyone. My name is Máté Holler, and welcome to the podcast of the European Union of Jewish Students. Joining us today is Sorin Ioniță, director of the think tank Expert Forum and a seasoned political commentator. Sorin is an expert in public administration, reform, and development, having worked as a consultant for institutions such as the European Commission, Council of Europe, the World Bank, UNDP, on matters related to Eastern Europe and the Balkans. Sorin, thank you for joining the Lowdown to help us understand the stakes of Romania's ongoing political crisis.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. And I have to tell you that we do less and less public administration reform or other kind of reforms, and we need to deal with this crazy politics. But this seems to be the spirit of the times in Europe, and not only in Europe.
Exactly. Thank you. With that said, I think that many of us hear about some turmoil coming out of Romania, and it has reached the international press. We hear about a canceled election, a far-right candidate now under investigation leading in the polls. Can you tell us what is the situation in a nutshell? And can you maybe provide also an overview of the events leading up to the November 2024 presidential election?
Yeah, although I have to be honest, I mean, we Romanians, we don't have all the facts on the table, so we are from time to time puzzled by what is going on. But as you said, in a nutshell, before November, it looked like things were on the right track for the ruling coalition, which is still the current ruling coalition in Romania. It's a big coalition between the so-called Social Democrats and the so-called National Liberal Party. And they were preparing to govern after the elections. They were even telling the public that the coalition is here to stay for 10 years. And of course, what was beneath was the usual Balkan politics, which means a lot of corruption, a lot of counter-selection in institutions based on loyalty more than competence, including there's been infiltration of politics and business by intelligence services, by our intelligence services, which created a very murky atmosphere and a lot of distrust by the public in politicians. So there was a lot of distrust, but somehow, I mean, they thought they could manage pull off these elections with Kremlin-esque devices like political technology, try to shape the electorate rather to listen to the electorate, which generated in the end a big vote of protest. And now the big question is why the protest vote went the direction it went. Because there was no other safety valve. There were several extremist candidates, and most all of them were the creation of the COVID crisis, and the lockdowns and the trauma, like elsewhere in Europe, So we have in the parliament now 2.5 parties, should I say so, which are directly the creation of the COVID, of the protest against vaccine, against lockdown, conspiratorial right-wing parties, xenophobic. I mean, everything you might expect is there. But Georgescu himself was a little bit of a surprise for everyone. We were in my organization, Expert Forum, and some other civil society organizations, and probably 3 or 4 media outlets, but only independent media, small cooperative of journalists who work mostly online and on projects. So the mainstream media was completely bought by the government. And the civil society and this independent media, we did monitor these guys, and there were signs that something is going on. We were, for example, doing monitorization on TikTok, on the TikTok network. And we saw a very implausible, very inauthentic behavior, and not only in the camp of Georgescu, but other extremist parties. And starting with the beginning of the year 2024, we published reports. I mean, there were politicians, for example, a lady who is now a leader of one of the parties that made it into the parliament. She was nowhere in real life. She was not on TV. She was not in public events. Nobody knew her, basically. But she was trending probably second on TikTok among Romanian influencers. It was unbelievable. It was something fishy there. And that was in January 24. And then everything went on, with unresponsive politics, as I described it, of the coalition government and paid media by the government. And then in September, October, we saw the flash operation of the Georgescu campaign, mostly on TikTok as well. It was very, very implausible. Obviously, there was a blueprint operation, which was tested elsewhere and just implemented in Romania. I mean, the guys knew what they were doing. And the only question was who were the guys actually orchestrating this campaign. And we still don't have a very clear answer from the authorities. As you know, immediately after probably 3 or 4 days of confusion among institutions after the first round, presidential elections, and there was a lot of cacophony. It was obvious nobody knew what to do. The current prime minister resigned as a leader of the parties. Other guys resigned. President was silent for 3 days. The electoral authorities and the Constitutional Court said everything was okay. And then they realized that not everything was okay. And they set up a National Council of Security, and then they put something in those reports to justify the Constitutional Court decision to cancel the first round of election. But when they declassified the documents, on which the court decision was based, there was nothing there. I mean, very little fact, a lot of allegations. And indeed, were there Russians? Most likely, yes, because if they are present in the whole region, why would they spare Romania? I mean, it's common sense. But from intelligence services, you expect more. I mean, some investigation in real life to prove the flows of money, to prove connections. And it's just now, in the last week, as we speak now, that we saw some evidence starting to appear, from the institutions, additional investigations in the media. But we are now 3 months after the event, and this whole interval was an interval of confusion, which create a lot of openings for the Kremlin propaganda to attack Romania, and through Romania, the whole European Union, because the rhetoric. Look what you are doing in a member state. You cancel elections when you don't like the results. And what can we show, to counteract such statements? Not much, frankly. And then, in another surprising twist, especially in the last month, we saw that actually Romanian democracy is under attack, not so much from Moscow, but from Washington, D.C. And this is something totally unexpected because, it's public knowledge that Elon Musk put the radar on Romania, and he's in the same way he did in Germany, actually, supporting the anti-European, xenophobic, anti-Semitic camp, which is Georgescu, but not only Georgescu, in Romanian elections. And then you had a whole network of shady guys around the Trump administration who were suddenly very interested in Romania, like Grenell, who was in the past an ambassador in Germany during the first mandate of Trump. And now he was like a go-between, especially in relation with two very, very shady characters in Romania, the Tate brothers, the famous affair of Tate brothers, British-American citizens, two brothers, apparently rich, who were investigated in Romania by the prosecutors for women trafficking and pedophilia and unexplained wealth. And suddenly, people around the Trump administration started to put pressure on the Romanian authorities to release these guys. They were under some sort of house arrest. They put pressure on our Minister of Foreign Affairs, his official, in the Munich summit, which is absolutely crazy. And 1 week later, what did the Romanian judiciary do? They gave them back their passports. They are still under investigation. They are supposed to come back to Romania, but the restrictions were relaxed, so they left. As I understand, they are in Florida. You realize that around the Trump administration, I'm not sure Trump personally, there are a lot of people where, the Georgist camp in Romania and the manosphere, so to speak, very well represented by the Tate brothers, but there's a very good overlapping between these two bubbles on the internet. So they have points of entry and they have influence in the US administration. And this is something radically new for us, because for 10 years or more, we were preparing to fight back against Russian propaganda, Chinese propaganda, or infiltration or influence. We are doing this, including in my organization. But to fight against Washington, that's something terribly new and very unsettling. And frankly, it took us by surprise. Now, we are today, right, the beginning of March, and indeed, the Romanian authorities started a real-life investigation against Georgescu. So not TikTok monitoring and trying to see if the spikes are authentic or not, but in real life, because actually the guy is very vulnerable. He has unexplained wealth, unexplained revenues. Nobody knows how he earns his money, but he lived for at least 10 years in Vienna, lavish lifestyle with his wife. And then last year, when he came back to Romania for campaigning, he just bought a villa in Bucharest, €500,000. I mean, this is like hologram people. They come out of nowhere and they don't live like every one of us. I mean, we must work to earn our money and we cannot afford what they afford. But apparently some people just breathe fresh air and that's enough to have a... Now they are looking into his case because he was vulnerable for many years, and it's a fault of the Romanian authorities that they didn't start it 2 or 3 years ago. He denied Holocaust. He's openly fascistic in his statements, praising the interwar extreme right, the Romanian one. He speaks about claiming back territories from our neighbors, primarily Ukraine, of course. So it's Putin's rhetoric about let's split up Ukraine and divide it among us. So he broke the law. There are Romanian laws against, for example, Holocaust denial. That's a clear law, and it should have been enforced years ago, but it wasn't. It wasn't. And if they disqualify him from these May elections, from the repeated elections, then he will ask a very legitimate question. Then how come you let me run in the November elections? Because I didn't do anything new meanwhile. You know, everything you know now about me, you knew it before. And more, the Constitutional Court disqualified an extremist leader in, I think it was in September, from the presidential run, Mrs. Diana Șoșoacă. She's now a member of the European Parliament, who is exactly a copy-paste of Mr. Georgescu, and there are others as well. So again, he might ask, why you disqualify me now? And Mrs. Șoșoacă will ask, then why did you disqualify me then? And you let this guy run, you know? So there's a lot of explanations from the Romanian authorities, which are still due. And it creates a very messy situation. Of course, I'm pretty sure there is external influence, that there were illicit money. By the way, he declared 0 campaign funds spent. And again, this is clearly breaking in breach of the law. And they let him pass, you know. So the electoral authority, before the November round, actually what they did, they were fighting with us, the authorities, with civil society and the media, because they classified the declaration of the parties about, and then the candidates, about the campaign expenses. So instead of investigating Georgescu before elections, not after, they were fighting the public opinion and the whistleblowers. So there was also a lot of complicity in institutions, we have to say that. And the 2 big parties, the mainstream parties, liberals and social democrats, they also tried in a very awkward way, but very typical for them, to use one extremist against other extremists. This is my radical guy, this is your radical guy. And they were trying to play strategic games for their candidate to end up in the second round with a preferred radical, so to speak, in order to secure elections for their mainstream candidate. It blew up in their face because it went completely out of control. And this is also part of the explanation of what happened. It was a real surprise for them because they were incompetent and they were trying to play strategic game, very complicated, which they couldn't. They created probably a wide window for interference from outside. I mean, if you are Kremlin, this is exactly the kind of situation in which they are expert to intervene. I mean, it's a perfect situation for Russia, with just with a bit of resources, you know, to the right intermediaries to amplify the confusion, which is exactly what happened. So the blame must be shared. But now, as we speak today, beginning of March, there's no doubt that there are mainstream candidates and that there are completely unacceptable and anti-democratic candidates, and something must be done. And the law must be upheld because we have laws. Apparently, under the new interim president, because the former President Iohannis resigned 1 month ago, under the current interim president, it looks like they are a bit more resolute. They are a bit more clear in their actions and they want to clarify the game. But we have to see, because the pressure is increasing from outside, as I told you. And we are not, I mean, Russians have been there like forever. This pressure from Washington, which is mostly rhetoric and on social media, but sometimes even diplomatic pressure, as I told you in the case of relaxing restrictions on Tate Brothers. This is something completely new, and I'm not sure we know how to deal with it.
Thank you so much for summing it up so well. Coming back to the interference part, I think there is also an element that we see regarding the security situation. So we saw that Romania's parliament has approved the legislation allowing the military to shoot down drones entering into the airspace. This law is being contested at the Constitutional Court. How do these measures fit into the broader regional tensions, particularly also in the context of the conflict in neighboring Ukraine? And additionally, how do other security measures, such as we saw also the Senate president participating in very high-level meetings in Paris and London, also perhaps reflecting Romania's strategic positioning in the region?
Yeah, there's a new sense of optimism actually compared to what we had before in the second mandate of President Iohannis, where the official position of the Romanian state was we do a lot, but we don't tell you. We don't tell the public. It's very, very bizarre regarding Ukraine. I mean, help for Ukraine or the security situation. Now, this thing with the drone, again, it's like the case of Georgescu. It was an old problem left to fester for too long, because the discussion started more than 1 year ago when we saw that these drones going astray, probably out of control, were landing in bits of territory in Romania, mostly in Danube Delta. And then you have a very strange situation that everybody was nervous. I mean, the danger was not very high for the public, but of course, people were normally nervous about the situation and were asking, and there was no clear answer for the authorities. I mean, you would expect some clarity, these are the rules, this is what we do. But under President Iohannis, there was silence for many days, and then they said something not very clear, and even some institutions contradicting each other. The situation was probably not very complicated. Apparently, the army said we have no law to shoot them down because these are unmanned aerial vehicles, and our laws were old from the early 90s when there were no drones, and every flying object was supposed to have a pilot. And then there was a procedure apparently where you warn first and shoot second. And in the case of a drone, I mean, this is stupid because it makes no sense to warn a drone. So that you couldn't follow the procedure. At least this is what the army said. I'm not sure. I haven't checked the military procedures in detail. And then the discussion, started. Everybody was hysterical. Let's change the law, of course, which is common sense. Let's change the law. But that was sometime last year in the spring of last year. And I don't know why it took so long in the parliament to modify the legislation, but anyway, it passed through both chambers and now it came to a vote. And of course, the radical parties opposed it. We don't know why, them being sovereignist and, every day about people and defending the nation. We don't know why they oppose legislation to shoot down drones. Probably, of course, because these are Russian drones and they don't want to shoot down Russian drones. Everything coming from the east is good.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it has to do with the Russian interference when it comes to the election itself. So probably are the same actors who are, being investigated for the interference also from Russia?
No,
are the
it
same
was primarily
people?
in the parliament. It was an anti-government, anti-ruling coalition vote. So whatever the government says, we will vote against. There was also a motion to depose the prime minister in the same period. So there's a permanent offensive and a rolling demonstration in Bucharest, in Victoria Square, in front of the government. It started in January, and I don't even know how they obtained the permit, actually, because sometimes, some days, it's just 3 guys with a flag and some loudspeakers playing folk music, and it goes on and on and on and on every day for more than a month. I don't know what kind of rolling demonstration, but sometimes there's more people there. So of course, it's an atmosphere which is maintained or, supported by a string of actions by these anti-system actors. And this is politics. I mean, you cannot blame them for organizing street demonstrations, right? But I mean, everything is simultaneous. The motion to depose the government, these votes in the parliament, I suppose they will vote against anything. So anything that comes on the table in the parliament, they will vote against, of course. Pretending that, the government is illegitimate, the president is illegitimate. I mean, what they positively claim is to the continuation of the November elections with a second round. This is what they ask now, to continue and have the second round. Let the first round validate the result of the first round, and let's move on to the second round with Georgescu and the lady who came second from the Reformist Party, which is not going to happen, of course, but it's a good point of propaganda. And there's a good segment of the public who buys this rhetoric.
You also mentioned that with the current Senate president acting as an interim president, perhaps this political situation has been a bit more stabilized, or at least, I wanted to ask what political measures are being taken to stabilize the political situation. And also, lastly, I wanted to ask, what are the prospects for the rescheduled presidential elections? How might these recent events shape the outcome?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is official. The elections are going to be in May, on the 4th of May and the 18th of May. The second round of Romanian presidential elections will be simultaneous with the first round of Polish presidential elections on the 18th of May. So there will be 4 weeks of fire in Eastern Europe in the two big countries, Poland and Romania, presidential elections. So very, very important. And the opinion polls are what they are, but we don't know. Opinion polls are notoriously unreliable in Romania because the profession is also slightly corrupt, and the whole political consulting is a corrupt profession. And, long periods of clientelism in a profession increases unprofessionalism as well. So we don't know what to trust. Probably Georgescu is top in reality, but again, he has to be allowed to run. He is now under criminal investigation. And if he is disqualified, it doesn't go automatically that the votes will be transferred to the next sovereignist candidate, who we don't even know who might be, because the leader of the Our party, Mr. George Simion, who is an old hand already in Romanian politics by now, doesn't have the same traction. So there are differences of style between them. And especially Mr. Simion doesn't have a wife like Georgescu, who is herself an influencer, with a very big bubble on social media, TikTok, with this alternative medicine, new age healing kind of huge followership. So he has support from many directions. So we have to see what's going to happen with his cultural political ecosystem, because he's more like a guru, actually. He's like a social Christian movement. He's more like a preacher than a politician, which is not true for Mr. Simion and the other extremists in Romania. So these are the perspectives. And again, under the new interim president, the president of the Senate who took over the position, we have a slight sense that institutions function a little bit more as they should. I mean, we don't know why the blockage was so obvious under President Iohannis. Probably he was not, I don't know. He spent the last year, Iohannis, just looking for a job for himself on the international scene. He proposed himself for being Secretary General of NATO. I mean, just imagine NATO today having Iohannis as a Secretary General. I mean, it's laughable. But eventually he didn't get anything, but the whole Romanian diplomacy was occupied for 1 year finding a job for the guy. I mean, that's what it happened. So this is why, there was this sense of disarray in Romania, and our presence in European institutions everywhere were very, very insubstantial because nobody was paying attention. Now, there is a sense there's a little bit more focus with a new president, and it's a matter of style as well. He comes from the local public. Iohannis came from local administration, but anyway, so the new guy, and it's also party politics. He came from a minority wing of the Liberal Party, so to speak, the new interim president. Probably less dependent on intelligence services in a clientelistic way. And the old leadership of the Liberal Party was decapitated after the November elections. but they are not out of the game. They are there. So there's an internal conflict in the Liberal Party, which is part of a coalition with the Social Democrats, a very, very complicated telescopic games of loyalties and conflicts between groups inside the ruling coalition. And we have to see where it goes until May. There's still a long time. I mean, looking how things develop, especially with the messages coming almost every day from Washington towards Romania, we became a case study, apparently, for people around Donald Trump. From now to May, there's a very, very long time, and a lot of things may happen.
Thank you so much for summing it all up for us and for providing your insights into the situation. We really appreciate it. And again, thank you for participating and coming to the Lowdown.
Thank you. Thank you. It was my pleasure.